Hi folks, welcome everybody. You might notice a couple of new faces here this week. We've managed to rope a couple of more people in, haven't we? It's growing. People are telling us they're watching them and finding them helpful. And thanks to everybody who sent us lovely emails. It's really spurred us on. It means a lot. And we've managed to get a couple more people in. It's always good to hear from other people, other perspectives and things. So this week's is about the critic, the inner critic, who I'm sure most of us have to some degree. Some more than others, and it's about how to kind of not allow the inner critic to take over and make things really, really difficult for us, and how to bring it in a more compassionate, encouraging, helpful voice. So it's not about taking the easy way out and not dealing with difficulties. It's about engaging with difficulties. Life is hard, we all suffer, but helping yourself through encouragement rather than, you know, being really, really critical. So some of the myths, I suppose, about self-compassion, and these are things that I suppose I generally thought as well before learning a bit more about it, is that, you know, self-compassion will undermine your motivation. So I have an inner critic. It's quite strong at times. It's been there a long time. I'm working on it, but I always thought that my inner critic was good for me and helped me to get things done. And if I didn't have the inner critic, then I wouldn't revise for exams, and I wouldn't work hard, and I wouldn't do all the things that exercise and do all the things that I need to do. But what we actually know is that when we're kind to ourselves and we're compassionate, we're actually more likely to do those things, to work hard, to procrastinate less, to engage in healthy eating and exercise and things like that. And we're less likely to try new things, because we're less likely to be afraid of failure, because we don't have a critic really criticizing us. If we make mistakes, we try again. So I know who I would rather have in there, you know. If you think about it, would a parent of a teenager who was doing no studying all day, you know, eating junk food all the time, would they just let them away with that? No, they wouldn't. You know, they would be encouraging the person to try and do different. Or if you had a son or a daughter who didn't do well on a test, would you really, really, really criticize them and say you're terrible, you know, you're useless, you're never going to amount to anything? Or would you say, oh dear, you know, that was hard, I wonder what went wrong, how can we help you to do better next time? So we do that for other people. Why shouldn't we do it to ourselves? But you know, it's not our fault. So having this inner critic, it's not saying anything bad about us or that we're weak or that we're silly. It's kind of natural. It's developed. It's a threat defense system. So we talked before about how, you know, many years ago it was dangerous to be a human being, and we were constantly looking for threat and scanning our environment. And, you know, that's how we're still here as a species. We've managed to live as long as we have. So we're always looking for dangers. And, you know, today's day, we're not in a lot of physical danger, but what we worry about, I suppose, is rejection, or appearing to make a mistake, or, you know, getting something wrong, and our bodies react in the same way. So we're kind of more worried now about our self-image and our self-concept than our actual physical danger. So the inner critic, you know, sometimes it can be helpful, but a lot of the time it isn't. Its intentions are good. Now, when I heard that, I thought, what? You're telling me my inner critic, you know, means well? It's horrible. When I imagine it, it's like a wee gremlin sitting on my shoulder, you know, constantly telling me I'm no good and I'm not doing a good enough job. But when I learned more, you know, through the work of Kristen Neff and Paul Gilbert, they helped me to see that the critic was probably there for a reason, you know, that it's been around maybe to keep me safe in the past, or maybe growing up it was helpful to me to keep me out of trouble, keep me out of danger. And instead of criticizing the critic, maybe we can see the usefulness of it at one time and maybe decide to let go of some of that it actually isn't needed right now. And Paul Gilbert uses a brilliant example. He talks about if you were deciding what school you'd like your child to go to, and you went to visit two schools. One school said, yeah, we really, really, really are quite harsh on our pupils. You know, if they make a mistake, we go through them like a ton of bricks, we punish them, you know, we really tell them off. That's kind of how we get people to come out with qualifications, right? And you go and visit the one across the street. Paul Gilbert talks about this. And there they say, you know, as a school, we recognize that being human is really difficult and that we all make mistakes and none of us are perfect. And if your child is struggling with something, you know, we generally remind them that struggle is to be human and we're here to help. How can we help you do better? And we give them lots of encouragement and praise when they do well. And when they make a mistake, we don't make a big deal out of it. Instead, we just help them to improve. And we say, this is part of being human. Which school would you choose your child to go to? Probably the nurturing, encouraging one, the less critical one. And it's the same for us. So even no matter how many years you've had that critic, it's never, ever, ever too late to look at it, acknowledge it, become more mindful of when that critic is running the show, recognize it for what it is, and maybe it was helpful to you at one stage, and maybe redress it and have a more encouraging voice in your mind. So the practice that we're going to do will involve, if you have a pen and paper handy, that would be great. It's a wee bit more of an active practice than maybe what we normally do. You can write things down, helpful things to help you remember. Don't worry if you don't have a pen or paper, you can always watch this again and just have a think about it this time and do it in your mind. But we're going to look at the critic and we're going to see how it works, and we're going to see maybe the helpful side to it, and we're going to try and bring a more compassionate voice to the critic in this one. And again, if you're finding it overwhelming, just mind yourself on this. Lots of emotions can come up for all of us. If you need to take a wee break, just take a break. But and maybe don't work on something that's too difficult. I'm no good at that. I always go straight for the jugular and work on the most difficult thing, but maybe you'll be better at this than I am. So again, just starting off with getting comfy like we always do. Feet on the floor if you can, bum in the seat, back in the chair, just helping yourself to feel grounded and just slowing things down a wee bit. You might want to close your eyes or just look down to the ground, whatever suits, and just taking a few deep breaths. Maybe making your in-breath a bit longer than the out-breath. And if you want, you can engage in soothing touch like we practiced before, hand on the heart or hand on your arm, or hand over your other hand or on your cheek, and just bring in a bit of warmth to yourself and the practice that we're about to do. A little hello to yourself and putting behind all the things you've been doing up until now. Feeling a bit more grounded. And if it's okay, to have a wee think about a behavior that you would like to change about yourself. So something that you typically beat yourself up a little bit about. And again, choosing a behavior that's not that helpful to you and is causing you a bit of unhappiness, but just choosing something in the mild to moderate range if you can. And again, picking a behavior that you can actually change, you know, so not, I don't like the size of my feet, but something like I'm impatient, or I procrastinate sometimes, or, you know, sometimes I struggle with confidence. Sorry, that's my phone going. And you might want to, if you have a pen and paper handy, just write it down and have a think about what you would typically say to yourself when you're engaging in this behavior. And sometimes you might use quite harsh words. You might speak to yourself in a way that you would never speak to anybody else. Or it might, instead of words, it might feel more like a feeling or an image. But what typically, when you're coming up against this difficulty, how do you relate to it? How do you speak to yourself? How do you feel? Is there a particular image that you might see, like a pointing finger, or maybe a big, large figure looking down on you or looking at you with a really critical look? If you could picture your inner critic, what would it look like? What size would it be? How would it be looking at you? And just taking a minute to notice how it feels when you criticize yourself. For most of us, it's really unpleasant. How much distress does that voice of self-criticism cause you? And if you can, just giving yourself a bit of compassion for how hard it really is to hear such harsh language. And just validate your feelings. This is hard. It's not easy to listen to that inner critic. I'm so sorry. I know how much it hurts to hear this. Bring a bit of warmth to that. It's not easy listening to the inner critic. And it might be helpful to reflect on why you think this criticism has gone on for so long, where it came from. Maybe it's a new thing to you, or maybe you've always been a bit critical. And like we said at the start, sometimes our inner critics might have been helpful to us in some way. Maybe helping keeping us safe from danger. Was your inner critic ever a useful thing to you in your life? Or not always. But if you can, just having a think about what might be motivating your inner critic. Is it there to keep you safe? Is it there to stop you making mistakes? Is it there to help you so that you won't be rejected by people? Is it there to help you get things done and not deal with not being perfect? And maybe write them down, write down if anything comes to mind, but don't worry if it doesn't. So even if you can't think of a reason why the critic might be helpful to you, just continue to give yourself compassion for how you've suffered from this critic in the past. And if you were able to identify some way that your inner critic might be trying to help you or to keep you safe or serve some function, see if you can acknowledge its efforts. And I know it sounds strange, but maybe even thank the critic. And let your critic know that even though it's not maybe helpful to you right now, its intention was good. And maybe it was just doing its best to keep you safe when you needed to be kept safe. You might want to write down a few words, what you would say to your critic, maybe thanking them. And now that your self-critical voice has been heard, see if you can make space for another voice, your compassionate voice. And this voice comes from a part of you that is very wise and recognizes how this behavior that you're thinking about is causing you harm. And it wants you to change, but for very, very different reasons. So maybe putting your hand on your heart or another soothing place, allowing yourself to feel warmth and care, just like you would for someone you really loved. And reflect again on the behavior that you're struggling with. And perhaps in your mind, repeating the phrases that your inner compassionate voice wants you to hear. So it might be, I know you don't want to suffer. I'm here to help. I care about you, and I want to help you to make this change. Or it might be, I know this behavior is difficult. I'm here to help you. I will support you. What would your wise, compassionate self say? Remember, your compassionate self is wise. It knows you really well, accepts you, and wants the best for you. So when thinking about this difficult behavior, what would your compassionate voice say to you about it? And maybe just writing down if any phrases come to mind. Words that would help you when you're dealing with this difficult behavior, instead of criticizing yourself. Maybe thinking about what you would say to a really dear friend who is struggling with a similar issue as you. Because you can be sure many of us are. And when you're ready, just letting go of the practice, opening your eyes and coming back to the room and each other. A really helpful practice, I find. And the next slide, you can actually, if you wouldn't mind flicking it on, Sarah, you can actually write yourself a compassionate letter, a letter to yourself, so that when you're feeling that critic being really harsh and taking over, what would your compassionate self say to you? You know, write a letter as if you were talking to a loved one who was struggling with a similar issue, and keep it with you and use it for those times when you're really struggling. How do people find that practice? And I don't know if people have practiced it before, or it might be brand new.
It's not something I've practiced before, Kira, and I think I thought it was really poignant and significant that thinking about your inner critic or your self-critic in a helpful way. I found that quite challenging. Because often we automatically think that's something that should be reduced or minimized or discounted, but rather than taking time to explore where it's come from and why at some stage or even now in our lives it might still have a place that needs to be thought about differently. It's challenging.
It really is. It is. And I remember hearing that for the first time and thinking, I'm not making friends with my gremlin. I'm not thanking it. You know, it makes my life really difficult. But I can see the origins of the critic, and we all have one. And that when you think about keeping me safe, it was around to keep me safe, but it's not really needed all of the time. You know, yeah, it's hard to do.
It connects. I've done this exercise a few different times over, I don't know, the last few years, and I kind of dip in and out of it. And it's interesting to see how it changes, because I was thinking as we were kind of settling into the exercise, I was thinking, where's my head going to go with this? I wasn't thinking that, but it takes you, like, you don't know where it's going to go, and you have to kind of make an effort to settle on something that's like mild to moderate. The tendency is to like jump into something like, crikey, the worst thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, it took me to like the need to not pull back all the time when I notice something, like the need to not retreat into myself, and to connect, like to know that I'm not on my own with the difficulty.
Yeah.
Like, which is why I think this kind of format is really great.
Me too.
Know, like, yeah. It's about human relatedness, isn't it? Like,
it is.
That's what I was thinking you were saying about the old kind of adaptive function of that kind of evolutionary threat thing, and then nowadays it's about how we could be triggered into that by like, I don't know, not fitting with the crowd, or feeling like we're being pushed out or something. Not good enough, all the social media, blah blah blah.
Yeah, it's more about self-concept now, isn't it, as opposed to actual physical danger.
Yeah.
And at least, you know, maybe back in those days when you got away from the danger, you felt okay again. But now if you're thinking about yourself and being rejected and maybe I'm not good enough, that can stay with you all the time.
Mm.
And it's this kind of thing, yeah, your phone with you all the time, kind of all those notifications.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Never switches off. It made me think, Ciara, actually, just about in the early, I think it was January time, maybe in the kind of lockdown situation. And I actually recall having a conversation with you. I've maybe mentioned this in possibly not one of our webinars now, but maybe a previous training clip, whereby I think I was speaking to you one afternoon. It'd been a really busy morning. I've been trying to homeschool a little one. Felt like I hadn't got any work done. And just as I was chatting to you, I think we'd received notification of having to build a tower out of some sort of boxes that had to be a particular height, and the teacher had to know exactly what the building was. And I think just at that point, I felt like I was literally like, I can't do this. You know, it's really hard to kind of keep on top of all of this, and the additional pressure. I think, again, I shared with you that I was previously in a past life a primary school teacher. So I was trying to juggle all of this. And you were really kind to me, and you were going through the compassionate focus training, and you just said, Sarah, you know, it was that good enough parenting. You can't do it all. It's okay to maybe just not do that final exercise. And it really just helped me, because I was being very critical. You know, am I being a good enough mummy, trying to get this? Am I being a good enough teacher, trying to get all of this done? Am I keeping on top of my work? And all that was going on as well at that time in terms of lockdown. And it was just that moment, Ciara, you know, it was really helpful where I just had to actually switch things around and give myself permission that it was okay not to build that particular.
Wonderful, yeah.
And you just do what you
can. Worthy of an architect.
Exactly.
And you know what, Sarah, if it had been me and I was speaking to you, you would have been able to say all those things to me. We're not used to talking to ourselves the way we do to somebody else, but it's possible. You know, we can turn it around. We just need to practice.
Absolutely.
Pauline, I've seen you taking your meat off, were you?
Yeah. No, I am much more aware now. My self-critic's coming up. You know, I'm more mindful of it when it's actually happening.
Yes.
And then it's kind of like my mantra is kind of like real but not true. You know, mine's called Fat Frank, by the way, not very PC, but kind of real but true. But I need a lot more work on developing a more compassionate voice, you know, that sort of way. I need to, but, you know, I'm just more mindful of when it comes up, and acknowledging it, real but not true, and then maybe developing, you know, that kinder stuff to me. I probably need to do more of that, but it's at where it's at, you know. But yeah, it's useful. It's interesting.
And the more you practice these things, the easier it gets. You know, my default is still to go straight to the critic, but the mindfulness part of self-compassion is I'm more aware of when I do it now. And then, you know, you can sort of stop for a wee second and go, hold on a minute, you know, that's a bit harsh. Would I say that to Sarah or somebody else, you know, and you can challenge it a wee bit.
Yeah, definitely.
You know what it made me think, Ciara, because when you started the exercise, I was thinking, you know, I've dealt a lot with my self-critic. But then it really made me think, when you asked me to think about something I'd like to change, maybe something I struggle with, it really told me just how subtle that self-critic still is, and I'm not really aware of it. But then why do I procrastinate? Why do I do all this work, but then that finishing, to get something over the line, to finish it? Yeah, it's subtle. It's outside my conscious. I'm not consciously aware of it, but it's there. That fear of criticism, that fear, that big finger coming at you.
I'm with you. Yeah, it's there. It's there for me too, and it's what stops you, because you don't want someone to read something and think that's rubbish or that's And how many times have you sent your booklet to us and I keep changing it? Hold on, Ciara, I'm changing it.
But you put something else on, you know, to me, you could get 100 people saying how good something is, 2 or 3 saying, who do you listen to?
Exactly. And that was a very adaptive function for us billions of years ago. When the world was dangerous, we had to look out for danger or we wouldn't survive. Whereas now the world has changed so quickly. We've still got the old brain that was in the caveman woman era. And that's why, so it's not our fault. And I think once I made friends with a critic and sort of thanked it and said, okay, you know, it was probably useful, it meant that I was less critical of having a critic, you know, because my critic can go, Ciara, how many years have you been like this? You know, how many therapies do you now know about? Your bloody clinical psychologist. You should be able to squash this inner critic down once and for all. Whereas when I made friends with it and said, well, it was there for a reason and it's been around a long time. And I you know, the grand old age of 46, I can begin to challenge it gently. It's made a massive difference. Yeah.
I think the use of thinking of kind words to say to yourself was quite powerful in speaking to it. I just noticed in the exercise, and for me, the words like what I was battling with is a terrible tendency to just give myself exhaustive lists or expectations of things to do.
Yeah.
And even coming onto this call, I just thought, oh, for goodness sake, I've only done X, Y, and Z today, and I'd hope to by this time of the day to have done this other task.
Yeah.
And the words "good enough," you know, and being able to say those, you know, for me being able to say that to myself, like I could feel the emotiveness of that. To actually that good enough, or you know, celebrate the small and the big.
Yeah.
But it's saying those words. I think again, even as psychologists, we can help people to think about what's rational, what's irrational, and what's the evidence for this or for that. But it maybe speaks to that sort of human connection of talking to yourself as, you know, a friend or a loved one would speak to you.
Yeah, and bringing the feeling of work. It's the tone of voice. It's not the words themselves.
Yeah.
The tone of voice that you use is so important. That's what Paul Gilbert, I suppose, discovered all those many moons ago. You know, he was doing CBT with people, cognitive behavior therapy, and people were rationalizing and saying, yes, I can see that, Paul. I can see that I am worthy and people love me, but I still feel like crap. I still feel really wrong. And when he got people to speak out loud how they spoke to themselves, it was so, the tone of voice was really harsh. And that's when he discovered, you know, we need to do something about this, and compassion focused therapy was born. But we need to try and wrap up, because these clips are meant to be nice and short for people. Thank you everybody for coming on, and thanks to everybody at home or work or who are watching. This is our helpline. I know I've said it at the other clips, for COVID related difficulties. That's the phone number that you ring if you leave a message, and one of us in the psychology team will give you a call back, and it's confidential. And then we've got the staff psychological wellbeing service, again for work related stress. Your line manager makes a referral, and then it's triage, and then someone from the service either works with you or puts you in touch with the relevant organisation. All right, so thanks everybody. We're planning another one, a Christmas special, so look out for that one as well. Thanks folks. Bye.
Bye.